Uh, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Craig Kletzing, who is the Donald and Marie Gurnett Chair Professor in Physics and Astronomy at the University of Iowa, and he is the principal investigator for UIowa's latest NASA mission. Now, this is no typical mission. This happens to be the largest research award in the university's history, and I'm really excited to be discussing this Tandem, Reconnection, and Cusp Electrodynamics Reconnaissance satellites, or tracers mission, that will be launching in 2023. This mission is part of a larger initiative called NASA's Explorers program, and that's studying how the sun affects space and the space environment around planets. Craig also is a space plasma experimentalist. He's working on several other NASA missions, but what I find something that I really used to appreciate about Craig is that he used to have the best hair of any physics professor. But I see, Craig, much to my dismay, that you've cut it, and it's so much shorter than when my time at Iowa. So Craig, please tell me that your rock band, Brace for Blast, is still going strong.
Sadly, Brace for Blast died a little while ago, but various other bands pop up. This happens with bands. They have a certain lifetime.
Okay.
And with the hair, there's this thing that happens as you get older. Sometimes you get a little thin on top. And it turns out long hair makes that problem worse. So I cut my hair, and it stopped getting thinner. So for me, that's a win. Well, a bald spot with long hair doesn't look good.
I'm glad that you're still involved in other endeavors, because I was concerned when I saw the MySpace link on your webpage for the band's music. It wasn't active, and so I was really worried that you weren't still producing. But I'm glad you still found other ventures.
Absolutely.
Now, Craig, I believe you were lecturing virtually today for your College Physics 1 class.
That's correct.
So I was doing some searching online, and your top tags on the Rate My Professor's website are lots of homework, but accessible outside of class and respected. And I can tell you that Rate My Professors is an anonymous site for students to list their grievances and air out whatever they'd like. And there was one student that posted a review, and I want to quote this because he said, quote, "Professor Kletzing is among the ranks of some of the best teachers I have ever had. Before this course, physics was my least favorite subject in all of high school. But after regularly visiting his office hours, I was excited for his class." And I think that speaks volumes to what you bring and how. And I just wanted to start by asking you, how are you continuing to inspire and generate this excitement? Are you paying your students for these reviews, or?
No, really, I think what it comes down to is I like to teach. And if you like what you do, you tend to do a good job at it. And so I still get a kick out of explaining somebody, and you sort of see that light bulb go off over their head about how something works. You get that new idea into their head. And so, to me, that's the real reward. And, there's an ancillary reward of this particular course is being taken by a lot of pre-health professionals. People want to be dentists or pharmacists or doctors. And one of the things I try to do is to let them know that, believe it or not, physics actually has something to do with your future profession.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I wanted to lead with that question because I believe teaching had no small part in your decision actually to come to Iowa, because you would start out in California, were educated in California. You were out at, I believe, at the University of New Hampshire doing research, but then you came to Iowa. And could you share a little bit more about how and why you ended up at
Well,
Iowa?
on the way there, we spent some time in Huntsville, Alabama. What I always usually say is I'm bad at geography, so we just had to move around to know where everything was in the country. There's a little bit of a process that goes on, and you're probably starting to look at this yourself, of when you finish up your PhD, you start looking for a postdoc or some kind of next profession. And next place you're going to work and do what you do. And when I finished up, there was a great opportunity to go to Huntsville, Alabama. That's where Marshall Space Flight Center is. So we moved there. And within a year, our entire group moved to New Hampshire because they recruited us away. And these are a couple of the places in the country that do space physics. And in the middle of that, I spent some time in Germany for a little over a year and a half, working with a space physics group there. And then when we got back, along came this job at Iowa, and this is really kind of where it all began, to be honest. I mean, James Van Allen was the chair of our department back in 1958 when he flew the Explorer 1 mission, which is really the beginning of experimental space physics. And so, this is really kind of the place to be. And so when the job came available for here, I applied, and I was fortunate enough to get hired.
That's fantastic, because yeah, I know that you're also, your background with Van Allen runs pretty deep, because I believe your PhD, your master's and your PhD advisor, Carl McElwain, was one of the proteges and studied under
Well,
Professor
that's
Van Allen.
absolutely true. Carl McElwain was my PhD advisor at UC San Diego, where I got my PhD. And he was the guy that went into the lab after Explorer 1 had this problem where they'd see counts go up and then suddenly go to zero, and people went, the detector has died. So he went into the lab and showed, no, in fact, it didn't die. It just got so overwhelmed it couldn't count anymore. And he showed that that's what happened. And so that was the first real inkling that, wow, there's a lot of something out there that we don't know about. And then they flew a couple more detectors on Explorer 3. We won't talk about what happened to Explorer 2. It didn't make it into orbit. That way, that was the confirmation of the radiation belts. And so, yeah, I have this link back to Iowa through Carl. And that's kind of fun. In fact, when I got here, he made a visit. So he and I and Professor Van Allen went out to dinner one night.
Oh, that's incredible. To be part of this legacy that James Van Allen has built must be really exciting. And I wanted to now ask you about a few superlatives about your career before we dive into the Tracers mission. Okay. So first, other than your 2000 Gary Jacobs handmade electric guitar, what have you enjoyed most about your time at Iowa so far?
Well, Iowa is, we have good students. It's a great university. We have a good physics department. It specializes, or one of our specialties, I would say, is the kind of physics that I do, which is space physics. But we also specialize in plasma physics. And those are things you don't find in every single physics department. So it has two of the kinds of physics that I really, really love. But, on top of that, Iowa turns out to just be a remarkably good place to live. Are we close to oceans or mountains? Well, no, not really. But, I have lived close to oceans and mountains, and you just don't even go all that often, the matter. And so having a really comfortable place where you can, enjoy the quality of life. When I tell people in California, and I'm sure you appreciate this, yeah, people in Iowa City whine about, rush hour traffic because it takes 10 minutes to get across town. It's 5 minutes to get across town. Things like that, or that, which really makes Californians jealous, since I grew up in California. I walk to work every day. And, those kinds of quality of life sorts of things just really make it a really nice fit for me, both on the professional side and, the personal side. And my wife is a professional musician, and, kind of one of the hidden secrets of Iowa and some parts of the Midwest, particularly Wisconsin and Minnesota, is we have a remarkably active music scene. And that goes from, sort of popular music up into classical music and things like that. So for the two of us, this has just been a super great fit.
Oh, that's fantastic. And now, secondly, I wanted to ask you what you thought your most significant accomplishment, or what something that you're most proud of having achieved while at Iowa.
Wow. Well, two things. One certainly is the Tracers mission. I mean, this is a full-up, complete mission that my team here is leading. These are pretty hard proposals to get accepted by NASA and to win and go off and do it. We're in the early stages now, but that's probably, you could argue, sort of a capstone career achievement. Probably one of the other things that I'm really proud of is my interest in just plasma physics by itself has led to an interest in collaborating with people that do laboratory plasma physics as well. And so for many years now, approaching 2 decades, I've been involved with a group out at UC Los Angeles that has what they call the large plasma device. It's a huge chamber. It's a meter by 20 meters. So, that's like 60 feet long. And we go out there and we do various kinds of experiments to test some of the theories that we're interested in. And so that kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration is something that I've really, really enjoyed. And I think, try to make that a bit of a model for others to try to do the same thing. And I think even we sort of started out very early on, and that eventually evolved into something that they now do on a regular basis with lots of different experimenters. So I'm pretty proud of that too. And then there's our Van Allen probes mission, and I was the principal investigator for a whole set of experiments there. And that's been a remarkably successful mission. The data from our instruments that we built has been included in more than 500 papers in the last little over 8 years.
Wow.
And so that's a, you know, at least on the academic side, that's a pretty good achievement. So, you know, those are just a few things.
That's it. I thought this was a planted question because I assumed you were going to say convincing President Bruce Harrell to ride a rocket-powered tricycle in your class.
Oh, well, now that you mention it, that was quite an achievement. Actually, the bigger achievement of that was, it was a class where I taught the same lecture back to back, and he you know, did the demonstration, and you know, the class thought that was just great, but then he had to wait to the next one, and one of his aides told me he actually was paying attention to what I was saying. So I thought that while he was waiting to get to do the next lecture, so I thought that was maybe an even bigger achievement.
Oh, absolutely.
But it was a lot of fun. I mean, the class got a big kick, and you know, that was tough. That's one of my favorite lecture demonstrations to do, because you just don't ride a rocket-powered tricycle across the classroom every day. But I thought, well, what the heck? Let's invite the president, and the class got quite a kick out of that. I think there's video somewhere.
Oh gosh, well we'll have to find that, because I can't wait to see his face as he's on that. Lastly, before we again dive into the details of your research, how can the general public contribute to your research and have the most impact on current students at Iowa?
Well, I guess this is where I make the plug for supporting the Center for Advancement. I mean, that certainly helps students with scholarships and things like that. So, you know, I always do like to point out that that's a very important thing the public can do to directly help folks, because, you know, donating, let's say, to our department, we use that to help fund graduate scholarships, help and bring new undergraduates, and you know, that's just purely on the funding side. The other thing I think, and particularly for the alums out there, is tell people about Iowa. You know, folks just don't even know, I think, you know, what a good university this is, and that it's a full university. You know, it's not just sciences, it's not just engineering. You know, we have the professional schools, but we also have, you know, a vibrant humanities part of our college. We have great arts. I mean, be it that music or visual art, you know, history, I mean, all those things. So a student that comes here, I think, gets a good liberal arts education, which is something I'm a big advocate of. I think it's important to be rounded, because, I mean, you know, well, as you get into your profession, you're just doing that all the time. But some of those classes that you had, you know, was it a history class or an English lit class, you know, those inform things that you're interested in. And often, and sometimes those develop things that you have a passion for the rest of your life. And you know, on the side, because you learned enough in that liberal arts education to really enjoy them. So I like to point that out. That's just, you know, that's the value, I think, of a good university education. And so let people know that this is a place that they should think hard about encouraging their students to attend.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, my favorite class at the University of Iowa was taught by Professor Jay Holstein, who's been, he's a Jewish rabbi. He's been lecturing for 50 years, and it was called The Quest for Human Destiny. And that it's classes like that I'll remember for the rest of my life. To be completely honest, I thinking back to Vincent Rogers' general relativity course, I'm really struggling to remember some of the details from that. But
I won't tell him.
So Tony inserted a link to the Physics and Astronomy Fund, for donations. But I totally agree with you, Craig, that Iowa is so multifaceted, multidimensional, and comprehensive in its scope. Now I want to dive into the details of your research, and you mentioned the Van Allen's probe mission and some of your earlier involvements that led up to the Tracers program. So could you kind of set the stage about mentioning what are the goals of that work?
Well, so you know, as you go along in a career, you gradually build more and more experience, and as you get to these bigger and bigger missions, NASA is investing more and more money, and so they really want to make sure things are going to work. So first, you know, we did a lot of sounding rockets, which are smaller rockets that kind of go up and come back down. They're suborbital, so they don't ever make it into orbit. And so my group did several experiments on those. And then along came this opportunity for, at that time was called the Radiation Belt Storm Probes. And NASA solicited proposals, and so we put together a team that consisted of Goddard Space Flight Center and the University of New Hampshire and the University of Iowa, and we proposed to provide a set of instruments for that, and we got selected. And then built, and I think we built a very successful set of instruments. And that gave me some key experience sort of on a bigger level of project management and all the things you have to do. We have to manage schedules, we have to manage the money, there's making sure the technical things are all coming together. So it's an interesting collection of different skills you have to happen. The business folks probably in the audience know about ISO 9000. We follow a similar kind of process to make sure we don't miss things and things like that. And so there's a huge learning curve for me. And so that learning curve of building, and it was 2 satellites, so it was 2 sets of instruments that had to be delivered, taught me a huge amount about kind of, what kind of skills do you need to have? What are the things that you're going to run into? There's always schedule issues. There's always money issues. I mean, these things just come up because there are what we call them the unknown unknowns that bite you every time in these kinds of things. And without that experience, I would have found it hard to do the Tracers mission. Just because there's so much stuff that you have to kind of just be aware of, and there's managing people and all kinds of things. And so I probably would have considered proposing, but I don't think I could have been as convincing about that we can really do this, we know what we're doing. And I wouldn't have known some of the key players in the field that I would want to involve. Because what's great about our Tracers mission is, in some sense, since I'm PI for the whole mission, I get to go pick the people I want to work with. And so we have a really, really good team of people, which is, I think, what won us the proposal in the end.
So can you unpack that term, Tandem, Reconnection, and Cusp Electrodynamics Reconnaissance satellites, and explain it like I'm a 5th grader, like I don't have any prior knowledge about this area?
I'm just impressed that you can say it all in one string. It took me a few times practicing, because I had to do a presentation in front of the head of science at NASA before they did the award, and I wanted to make sure I didn't screw that up, because it looks kind of bad that the PI can't name his own mission. So it's an interesting kind of mission in the sense that we're answering a question that's been around for at least 25 years, approaching 30 years by the time we fly the mission. And what we know is that the sun, provides a huge source of energy, and it streams at us something we call the solar wind. That solar wind, if our planet didn't have a magnetic field, would come and directly interact with the atmosphere. But instead, we have a magnetic field that's a bubble around the Earth. And that solar wind interacts with that bubble to transmit energy into the space around the Earth. And the process where that happens, or one of the processes, is something called magnetic reconnection. We're not going to go down that path, or I'd have to pull out the blackboard and start drawing pictures. But one of the things we know is that when that process happens, we see a bunch of particles come in, and we can see those at low altitude where tracers will be flying in a particular region called the Cusp. And it's a place where, with the way the magnetic field of the Earth works and so forth, these particles come in and make it all the way straight down to basically to the atmosphere. And what's interesting is the question has been, well, does that magnetic reconnection process, is it something that turns on and off in time? Or is it a process that's happening in maybe 3 or 4 different places at once? And, depending upon how they come down to the Earth, they map to different places. And so if you fly through a satellite, you'll see a different signature. And those 2 signatures look exactly the same if you only have one satellite. You can't tell the difference because you're going through one time. And so you can't tell if it turned on or off, or whether what you're just seeing is you're jumping from region to region. And people have tried to do this with a whole variety of different satellites to combine them, but they're either too far apart in either space or time. You can't really quite make it work out. And people have tried for a while. And so back about, 5 or 6 years now, we proposed a mission called TRICE, which was the Tandem Reconnection and Cusp Electrodynamics rockets. And
another mouthful.
Yeah, right. Twin reconnection, excuse me. It's been a while. And that was to try to do this as sort of a one-off. We'd launch 2 of these sounding rockets and compare them. And kind of in the first year of that, one of my co-investigators said, hey, this is such a good idea. We ought to propose this as a satellite mission. And so that was the beginning of the whole Tracers mission. And so, we started working on it, putting together our first proposal went in 2016. So that gives you some idea of the time scale. And we won't fly till probably the end of 2023 or maybe the beginning of 2024. We'll kind of have to see how that all works out. So you can kind of see the time scale for doing this kind of stuff. But basically what we're going to be able to do is answer this key question is this something that happens in multiple places, or is it something that just is turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off? And you just might say, well, that's all great. Fun science question. Who cares? Well, one of the things we'd like to be able to do long term is to be able to better predict what the effects are when the sun, throws what's called a coronal mass ejection, which is a big pile of hot gas that it shoots out. Now, to the sun, the Earth's, a little tiny marble, so it's pretty hard to hit. But we do know they have hit, or they've done glancing blows in the past. And when they do so, they rile up everything so much that, like, aurora become much brighter. They move very far south. But more importantly, they've had distinct effects on the things that we use, both in space and on the ground. One of these kinds of big storms caused a huge power outage in Quebec back in the late 1980s. That whole section took them a while to get power back. You may all remember these big paper things that we used to use to navigate. Now everybody uses, one of these. Well, that's because your phone is receiving signals from GPS, which are satellites. And so we have a lot of things that we use in space. And so there's concern, and these big effects that we've seen have mostly been glancing blows. So if we get a straight on one, people don't really know what the full effect is. I mean, we can try to extrapolate and figure it out, that what we think might happen. But the more we study this and understand this process that we'll be doing with tracers, the better we can tell the people that make the big, complicated physics models to say, if your model doesn't do this, it's not doing the right things. And so that's a lot of what science is, okay, I have an idea of how it works. Now I'm going to test it. And so tracers ends up being a key test that will help us develop better models so that if we do see that thing coming from the sun, we have a better idea about how the Earth system is going to respond and what we might need to do to mitigate it.
What I find so fascinating is that you're studying these cusps, which are primarily near the poles, I believe, but they've caused auroras as far south as Texas. And yet they can interfere with GPS and radio communications all the way in Canada, or, so it's really incredible to me. And this is, to my understanding, the first time these cusps have really been studied in this type of detail.
Yeah, I mean, to have a dedicated mission that's doing it all the time. There have been a couple of others that have flown through and collected data. To have one that's really focusing on this region is really kind of the first time. And sort of what goes on here is the cusp acts as like a little television screen, or almost like a funnel. It focuses everything down into a small region that's very accessible. And so that's part of why this works so well. So it's sort of a diagnostic test, if you will, as to how the whole system is behaving. And then these other phenomena can happen. So should we get one of these when we're flying through the cusp, I mean, we'll be extremely intrigued to see exactly how does the cusp respond when we have one of these big active events.
Something else that I find really incredible is I found your first publication. It was back in 1983 when you were an undergraduate, and it's entitled "Evidence for Electrostatic Shocks as a Source of Discrete Auroral Arcs." And I just find it incredible that you've been able to continue this fascination with auroras and interactions in the magnetic field throughout your whole career, really. And so I was curious to know, was there a specific point when these ideas or the seeds got planted for tracers in the journey? Does it date some of this, go all the way back to your undergraduate work, or was it along the way?
Well, I don't know if tracers per se goes all the way back but that paper actually got published when I was in my first year of graduate school. But what happened was, I sort of reached a point in my undergraduate career where I'd been working with another faculty member, sort of coaching freshmen. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to do a senior honors project of some kind. And I asked him if he'd consider working with me on that. I said, sure. And so he invited me up to this place at Berkeley called the Space Science Lab. And he had set me down, and actually I started looking at microfilm traces of magnetometers on the surface of the Earth. And so I started doing that and getting some results together. And then they said, hey, you want to work here this summer? And I said, sure. Beats whatever else I think I had in mind. And so I started working there that summer, and then that fall I started applying to graduate school, and I sort of had gotten a little bit off sequence, taking a quarter off. So I was going to graduate at the end of December. And I said, hey, can I keep working here, until I go to grad school? And so, I kept working, and I worked on these, and I started putting this data together for that first paper, and wrote the paper up. And I found I really enjoyed it. And working on that stuff kind of motivated me that I wanted to do the science myself, because I probably could have hung around Berkeley and continued to be a programmer and writing code for people and stuff like that. But it motivated me to go to grad school because I wanted to be able to do it for myself. And that really helped in grad school, because if you know you want to be there because you want to do the science, it really helps. Because my first year, I'd say maybe a quarter of the class didn't come back after summer, largely because they were young guys and they got great jobs in San Diego, working for the aerospace industry, and beaches and partying stuff like the attraction versus studying like a maniac. But so that's kind of the genesis of loving space physics, and certainly of liking to do hardware things. I mean, I've always liked to make things with my hands. But really, the genesis for tracers probably came about sort of, the first inkling of an idea when I was at New Hampshire. I worked on the basics things of the problem, and then that kind of just sat in the background for a while. And then I forget, it was probably around 98 or 99 that I had this idea for a rocket mission. And then sort of 2003 or 4, I wrote a proposal with a couple of other groups to do TRICE. That was the first time. The first one had some failures. And so by then, the idea had crystallized that I wanted to look at this problem because I'd worked on a piece of it much earlier. And so I think it's kind of how things often go in science, is that you do one problem, you do another problem that's related, and you kind of shift around depending upon kind of where your interests go. And that's really, to me, what academic freedom is about. It's not that I can just say whatever I want. It's that I have the freedom to look at different kinds of problems and sort of choose where my academic interests go. And I think that's a very important thing, because it allows one as a professor to maybe even have 2 or 3 years where you don't get as much out because you're learning a new thing that you want to do about the next kind of problem, and then you go forward from there. And so it's kind of the genesis of lots of different pieces coming together. I guess the unifying theme is I've always been an experimentalist. I mean, I like to build hardware that's going to make a measurement and give us back a result, because weirdly enough, physics is an experimental science. You can't always convince theorists of that. I've actually heard the comment, well, if your data doesn't agree with my theory, your data is wrong.
That's theorists for you.
Yeah, well, but I like making measurements, and I like putting things together, and I like working with the team and getting things to happen. And it's the greatest satisfaction, when you get something flying and you get some good measurements back. And one of the things I can say is the TRICE 2 rockets were super, super successful, which I think helped us win the Tracers proposal, because we could show NASA, look, this is what you're going to get, but instead of 1 over the course of 4 years, you're going to get 9 of these a day. Because the orbital period gives you about 9 passes through the cusp every single day. So like I say, it's an interesting way of how you don't necessarily go in a straight line, but you get led from interest to interest, and these things gradually accumulate as you move along in a career, which keeps it interesting. I mean, that's why physics and research is fun, is because it's not the same old every day.
Well, I find it so exciting that you were able to, along the way, build up these collaborations. You referenced UCLA, and in the Tracers project, there are several other institutions that are part of this. And I wanted to ask about, it seems to me that you're in charge of the mission and actually making sure it's a success. But what role are the collaborators, and is NASA providing anything other than funding?
Well, NASA will provide the launch.
The launch, okay.
We had originally proposed to do the launch and contract that ourselves. NASA said, we'll do that. But no, I mean, I can very strongly assure you that NASA has asked me more than once to make sure that you understand you are responsible for this mission happening.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. And so our other collaborators are UC Berkeley, Southwest Research Institute, Bison Aerospace, Dartmouth College, University of Colorado at Boulder, Auburn University. Let's make sure I don't leave anybody out. I think I got everybody there. And so they're different pieces of the collaboration. So the first kind of set is who's helping me with what I call my leadership team, which are the people that help us manage the project and make it happen. And so we have a project manager, a guy named Ron Black. He's at Southwest Research Institute. And we partnered with them because he has the requisite experience for doing these bigger projects. And also they have a lot of important tools. There's a lot of software tracking things that we use and stuff like that to make sure things are happening as they go along. And then on the engineering side, you have what we call a project system engineer. And there's a guy named Dan Mark that has the first aerospace company in Wyoming. And he's our project system engineer. And I'd worked with him on, well, both of these guys I'd worked with on previous projects, so I knew what their capabilities were. And so that's kind of our core management team. And then we also have our deputy program project manager, a guy named Bob Harbaugh, who is a master at scheduling. And so, we have to do schedules in all kinds of details, all these little tasks, and map things together, so that you can track and make sure that you're going to deliver on time, and that something isn't getting too expensive or late or all those kinds of things. That's our core management team. And then our instrumenters are Stephen Fuselier at Southwest Research Institute. He's our deputy project principal investigator, so he's my deputy on things, but he's also providing the ion instrument that makes one of the most key measurements on tracers. UCLA builds magnetometers for us, and so there's a guy named Bob Strangeway there who's in charge of that piece of it. A guy named John Bonnell at UC Berkeley is in charge of doing the electric field experiment. And then here at the University of Iowa, Jasper Halkus, one of our other professors, is building our electron measurement. And one of the researchers in our department, Dr. George Hospodarsky, is building a search coil magnetometer, which measures waves. So those are all the instruments. And so each of those people has the lead in terms of building that hardware. And then, because you got to compare this to something at some point, we have a lead theorist modeler, a professor at Auburn University, Yu Lin, and she has one of the most sophisticated kinds of big computational models of this region of the Earth. And so, we'll be working with her, feeding her data and things like that as we do things. She'll run different models, and it helps us both look at some of the details and kind of the big context of the things that we're seeing in this one particular region as we fly through. And then I forgot Lockheed Martin Palo Alto. That's our key orbit, and he's also a science guy, but he knows a lot about modeling and how to make sure you know what your orbits are going to do and what kind of orbit you need to achieve the science. A guy named Steve Petrinick. And one key guy that's worked on this problem a lot is a guy named Karl-Heinz Trottner, who's at Colorado, and Jim LaBelle at Dartmouth is the lead there, and he does a huge amount of work on wave physics and electric fields over the years. He's my main cohort, or partner in crime, I should say, on doing sounding rockets. And so he was very involved with the TRICE mission as well. And so that's kind of our team. So it's actually, we're spread out pretty much across the entire country. We're pretty good at using these web tools. We did not plan on using them quite as much as we are in the current environment, but in some sense, our team have been more experienced than others simply because we are so distributed and you can't just always meet in person. That being said, we'd really like to meet in person if we can. So we've been doing a little bit of that, but you have to be very careful in the current climate. So it's a pretty far-flung team with and different people have different responsibilities.
Well, that's so cool. Thanks for providing that sense of breadth and scope. And now we're going to transition to some questions from the audience. And you just talked about this virtual setting that you've been having to do research in. And the question is, how are you able to continue to inspire and teach in a COVID world?
Well, it's not trivial.
I imagine.
But one of the things that I've tried to do, and it's a little bit how my style is I've tried to keep it as close to the regular lecture experience as I can. And so what I do is actually, we have a really fantastic lecture demonstration guy named Dale Stilley. I assume you came across him.
Yeah, Dale is
He's an absolute master at coming up with these demos. So just he and I go into one of our classrooms, and it has to be adjacent to where he has all the demonstrations. And then I lecture just like I was in front of a class. It's only the two of us. He's running a camera so you can see me, but he can follow me around. So I'm still writing away on the blackboard. I'm saying all the stuff I would normally say. If we're going to do a demo, then we move the camera over and they can watch me make it work, or not, as sometimes happens when Professor Kletzing screws up. And we repeat it. And fortunately, he's right there. So sometimes Dale has to come and help to get it to work. So I try to keep that lecture part of it as other than it's on a screen instead of being there in person, it's pretty much all the same stuff that you would be getting. And I think that helps. Now, we also do what they call hybrid. So that's a mix of synchronous and asynchronous. So I live stream it at the time of the class, which is 8:30 in the morning. But also I record it because Zoom allows you to do that. And so then I post those videos. Now, I'm sure you've never minded getting up at 8:30 in the morning.
Oh, of course not.
I've sort of discovered is attendance when you do this does tend to dwindle a little when people know there's a video I can go watch later, and I don't really have to be paying attention at 8:30 in the morning. That being said, still a pretty good chunk of the class continues to attend. I mean, at least that was the behavior in the spring. And then we've also changed up some of the other parts of it, which I'm going to be very curious to see how this works out on a bigger scale, but it might be something we'll actually stick with. So for laboratory, normally people would come in and use the equipment, but that's complicated when you're trying to keep people socially distanced and things like that. And so for this class, our lab coordinator came up with they found this device that is out there and we can use, that's about the size of a couple of packs of cigarettes. And it has a whole bunch of different sensors in it, accelerometers and spring force meters and things like that. And the students can rent this for about $50. So we have a whole series of labs. Every student has their own device. Every student does their lab themselves, and the TAs can guide via a Zoom session so that people can have some questions if they get stuck, things like that. But I kind of like it because everybody has to do their own lab, and I think you figure out things a little bit more when you're not working in a team. You need to have a TA to sometimes help you over the bumps and things like that. And I also have sort of a secret wish that some of the students will say, hey, this thing's cool. What happens when I do this? Because that's really what experimental science is about. So I think for lab, I could almost see we might stick with this in the future. And, maybe there's some in-person stuff, but I really kind of like this idea of people particularly if we see some experimentation on their own, I think that's a really healthy thing. And I think you actually almost learn more physics doing a couple of things like that than, a bunch of labs that we've just kind of outlined for you. And then discussion sections we do online, but that works pretty well too. We do guided things, and we've switched that a bit probably actually since you were here, where it's more about having the students solve problems and then we guide them. And one of the interesting things that I'm finding both in lecture and with discussion section is I think because people are in their kind of home environment where they're comfortable, they're actually more willing to ask questions than they are in lecture or in person. There's a lower risk threshold there. Sure. And so that's a healthy thing. And so I'm really, kind of intrigued by how some of this goes. That being said, I'd still much rather have everybody there for me to lecture because it's a little more fun to see it live. But we have worked out some of the camera technology now too. So I think in the future, we'll be able to show some of the demos, on the big screens much more clearly. We had some good success with that in the spring when I was doing some optics stuff where you could really see stuff really, really nicely. So, you figure out new things as you go along. But so far, it seems to be working pretty good.
Oh, fantastic. We had a question about this launch that's happening hopefully end of 2023. From where, is there a location, and will you be able to attend it?
Well, I certainly plan on going. Wouldn't miss it after you've spent this much time.
Yeah,
by that time we're approaching 8 or 9 years until this thing gets launched. There's no way I'm going to miss that. The launch, since this is going into what we call a polar orbit, there aren't that many places you can launch and do that. Oddly enough, NASA has some sort of reservations about dropping large rocket stages on top of populated areas. So you can't go polar from Kennedy because either, that's going north or south. Either way, you got Miami to the south, you got New York to the north. And so that doesn't work well. So the place in the US where people typically launch anything that's polar is from Vandenberg Air Force Base out in California, because the coast of Santa Barbara there, it cuts strongly in towards the east. So, you're only over land for a very short period of time. And there's, very little risk if something goes awry, which, space is still a pretty tough business. So, things have failures every once in a while. And so for this kind of orbit, we will probably launch out of Vandenberg. That being said, there's a lot of new rocket things coming along. There's a small vehicle called the Electron that's being put together by a company down in New Zealand, and they've done several launches, and there's some others. And so we'll see. New Zealand can launch either to the east or to the north because they launch off the tip of the and it goes way out over water. So since NASA's providing the launch and we're cooperating with them on a variety of possibilities, so we may, the most likely thing is we'll get joined to some other payload that needs a similar kind of orbit, some other satellite mission, and then they are the primary, they go, they kick them off, and then we go later. But it will go off of the West Coast almost certainly, unless something happens with this company in New Zealand and they decide, yeah, let's put you on a couple of those and we'll launch them that way. So that's kind of all stuff that we'll be working out over the next few years.
Sure. Okay. So another question we had was if you had an aha moment in tracers so far. If you have, what would that be? And if not, then what do you think? What are you waiting? What do you think the timeline is before it's hard to predict with research, obviously. But.
Well, yeah, no real ahas yet, simply because we're just getting the mission going. We've only really been funded and moving forward with NASA for about 3 months now. So we're still in all the planning stage, because there's a lot of we decide what all the requirements are, everything. There's a lot of formality that we have to get done. I think the aha moments though will come when we can look at that data and say, under these conditions, it's this kind of thing. Under those conditions, it's a different kind of thing, or it's some mix between the two. I mean, it sort of reminds me of one of the questions we got in one of the reviews is, well, what do you think the answer is? Yeah, we sort of scratched our heads and went, if we knew the answer, we wouldn't have proposed the mission. So, you sometimes get these curious questions, and it's like, no, that's what we're trying to figure out. Nobody knows the answer. And so, I would bet that in some situations it's one thing, in some situations it's another, and sometimes maybe it's a mix of these two, of being at space or time and so forth. But we'll have to see. I mean, you can predict all you want, but then you go and measure, and sometimes you go, oh, it's not quite what I thought it was. And so those are where the aha moments come, is where you go, huh, that's not what we expected to see. Now we got to go put on our thinking caps and figure out what happened.
Well, and that's what makes research so exciting, I'm sure, that these unexpected discoveries, and you're going into areas that really are completely unknown. Craig, I would love to continue to chat with you, but unfortunately, for the interest of time, we're going to probably have to wrap things up. I will say I've also gotten some messages about apparently the audience members are curious about the rocket-powered tricycle and want to know if they could ever ride in it. So maybe you've got some excitement
I'm
there.
sure
already.
I would have to look into liability issues about having people just come in and ride it. If we hurt the president, oh well. But nobody from the public. Typically, that's only a demonstration that I do in the first half of the engineering-based physics. I don't do it for the pre-health professions. But it is pretty fun. It really is just a big tricycle with a fire extinguisher on the back, and you squeeze the fire extinguisher and you go shooting across the front of the lecture hall. But it is kind of fun to do, and it's a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher, so it makes a big plume of fog behind you. In fact, when I first did it, the president he'd never done it before. So he got about 2/3 of the way across and stopped. So I thought he was done. So I started coming around the lab bench, and then he took off for the last little bit. So I got this big plume over me, which, as you can imagine, the students thought was just wonderful.
That speaks. I think that's the image we're going to leave the audience with today is you being covered in a pile of fire extinguisher detritus with the president on the other end. Craig, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day. This has been really just absolutely compelling. And to everyone, just wanted to say thank you for joining us wherever you may be. As always, on Iowa, go Hawks. And please, everyone, enjoy the rest of your week. And thank you so much.